Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to change an oil pan gasket on your 5.4 liter 3-valve F150. This process should be the same for all Fords with a 5.4 3-valve. My truck is a 4-wheel drive, so there's a few extra steps that you don't need to do if you're 2-wheel drive, but I'll let you guys know what those are when we get to them. So to start off, you want to make sure that you have all the supplies for the job before you get started. This is technically a 2-day job because you have to let the sealant for the oil pan sit for 24 hours until it's fully cured. So you want to make sure that you set aside enough time to get the job done correctly. So let's go over the parts that you're going to need. First off, you're going to need the oil pan gasket, ultra black gasket maker, fresh oil, genuine Ford Motorcraft oil filter, and then you're going to want all the stuff you normally use to do an oil change in your truck. As far as tools go, you just need your standard socket set, wrenches, basic tools to get this job done. Nothing is too crazy. Obviously, if you got an impact or electric tools, it'll always make things a little bit faster, but you can get the job done with hand tools. Step 1 is going to be to put your truck in the driveway and chalk your wheels. Safety first. Step 2, clear your workspace and open the hood of your truck. Next step is to get your front end jacked up and on jack stands. Once your truck is jacked up, you want to take off the passenger side wheel and tire. After the wheel and tire is off, you want to adjust your jack and jack stands to make sure that everything is down and secure. Okay, so once your truck is up on jack stands, nice and secure, we're going to go underneath the truck and do a little inspection and just make sure that we're doing the right job. You could also do this before you obviously get started or before you buy the parts to make sure that this is where your oil leak is coming from. Okay, now that we're under the truck, you can definitely see that my oil pan is leaking. So this is your oil drain bolt, the oil pan, and all around it is completely soaked. I've already cleaned it a few times and driven it, and it is for sure coming from the oil pan. You can see that there is a lot of buildup down here where the transmission is mated to the engine as well. And just to make sure that it's not a rear main seal, which from what I read is kind of uncommon for these trucks, you can pop open this inspection cap right here. You can use a screwdriver, sometimes you can get it with your fingers. So when you pop it open, you can just get a little flashlight and get in there and check if it's wet on the flex plate right here. So if there is oil inside of here, coming out of here, then there is a chance that you do have a rear main seal leak. If it's pretty dry, chances are it's just blowing back all over this housing as you drive, and that's just soaking everything up because you can even see it's down here in my transmission pan too. It's just kind of spraying back as you're driving forward and as it's leaking. The other place you want to check is all the way up there where your oil filter mounts to your engine. So you can either check that from the front or back here. I know it's kind of dark right there, you can't tell, but when you change your oil filter spins onto that adapter. You want to make sure that there's no oil coming off of that adapter because sometimes it can leak so badly that it blows back all the way to the oil pan as well. So again, I don't have anything coming from up there, it's completely dry. So it's looking like it's just gonna be an oil pan gasket for me, crossing my fingers. So we'll get this job done, get it cleaned up, drive it, and hopefully that was the fix for you, and hopefully it's a fix for me as well. So once you're down here, just take a look around and get familiar with where everything is, because we're going to be removing the sway bar, so this entire sway bar that goes across, the cross member, and then also unbolting your front axle and letting it drop down a little to give the pan clearance. So obviously your oil pan is probably still full of oil, so the first step again is going to be drain your oil like you do for a normal oil change. So I got my oil drain pan right here. I'm going to go ahead and drain out the oil. So take that off, let your oil drain just like a regular oil change. Okay, once you're done draining your oil, you're gonna go ahead and put your drain bolt back in just for now so that nothing's dripping out of there. Go ahead and kind of clean up as you move. So wherever you're working, just use these shop rags and clean up. I'm not using brake cleaner just yet because obviously we're gonna take everything off and clean it all off of the truck. But for now, just kind of giving it a wipe down so that nothing's dripping on me and I can see everything as I'm going on. The next thing we're gonna do is remove this cross member right here. So this cross member is gonna be an 18mm nut on the other side and then a 15mm bolt on this side. So you're gonna hold on to the nut, take off these two bolts, and then repeat it on the other side. All right, just be careful when you're taking out these last bolts because obviously the cross member is gonna fall down. All right, cross member's out. Just make sure you keep these bolts and nuts together and set them aside with the cross member. The next thing we're gonna take off is gonna be the sway bar link. But before we take it off from these mounts right here on the frame, we're gonna disconnect it from the lower control arm. So it's gonna be an 18mm nut down here. That's obviously connecting this link, but it's one of those weird reverse things. So you gotta break the nut first and then use either a little hex that goes in there, I don't know what size, or else an 8mm wrench will fit down here on this end. So first we take our impact, we break it loose so that it spins, and then we're gonna take our 18mm wrench, and then you'll actually tighten the little one So right now I'm holding the big nut in place while tightening the actual bolt, if you want to call it that. And you'll see that'll come right off. So we'll leave that. So now you can see that the sway bar link is loose, so it'll come out of the control arm once we get everything else loose. So do the same thing on the other side. So once you have that disconnected on both lower control arms, we're gonna move on to the bracket that attaches it to the frame. So right here, it's gonna be a 15mm nut, one on the front and one on the back right here. So we'll take these off next. Okay, so once the sway bar comes down, you can see that it's kind of hanging there into the lower control arm. So you can just lift it up a little bit and take it completely out of the way. It's pretty heavy, so just be careful. And that's gonna open up a whole bunch of space down here. So now you can kind of start to see why we're doing this. So if you have a 2-wheel drive truck, you are ready to take off your oil pan. And if you have a 4-wheel drive truck, the next step is gonna be to disconnect our axle. So there's gonna be some 15mm bolts that we're gonna loosen up. And then the axle is gonna kind of just drop down onto the lower control arm and give us enough space to wiggle out the oil pan. Come up here, here's our axle. So there's a lower control arm, here's the axle. You'll see there's a 15mm bolt right here. There's one right back here. And there's also one up here on top of the diff. So this one's kind of covered by this mount right here in the frame. So you got to use either an extension or something to kind of get up in there and get it loose. There's not much space to turn it. So that back one came out. So now we have the one on the front that's up here on top of the actual diff. So that one looks like it's a little bit harder to get to, but I'm gonna try to use my gear wrench and get that off. Okay, so all 3 of those axle bolts are out now. The one that was the hardest to get out was this one up in the top, on top of the diff cover in the front. If you have help, that'll help you out a lot. Pretty much we had to put some pressure on the diff and just kind of lift it up a little bit and use a pry bar to knock out the bolt. If you have small hands, you can kind of reach it and touch it just a little bit. Just make sure that somebody's holding up the diff. We were gonna use a jack, but we ended up getting it out just by lifting it. So that lowered everything down just a few inches, and that should give us enough clearance to get the pan out. So the next step is gonna be to take off all of your pan bolts. And since you drained your oil already, it should be pretty empty, but there still will be some oil left over, so just make sure you have a mat down and keep it clean. So right here, you can see these are all your bolts. So you're gonna go around the entire oil pan and just take them all off in no particular order this time. But when you put them back on, there's gonna be an actual torque sequence for it. It's actually the next day because we lost sunlight, so we're gonna pick up right where we left off. So I started taking off some of the oil pan bolts from the back. They're all 13mm bolts. They're pretty easy to get to along the sides, except for these front ones right on top of the steering rack. Those ones are a little bit hard to get to. You could use a gear wrench and kind of get it from the front, in front of your frame, or from the back as well. But I ended up using a wobble extension with a swivel head and a socket, and I was able to get it onto those to break them loose. So those are the only ones that were kind of tricky to get to. On some years and makes and models, you might have these transmission lines kind of in the way. You probably have to loosen some brackets and push it out of the way. On mine, I was able to just get to it just by pushing them by hand. You can see they move a little bit. So now we have the axle dropped, so you guys can see right there is where it lines back up to. And I'm just gonna take out the rest of these oil pan bolts, and then after that, we should be able to drop the pan out. If you guys are wondering what I meant when I said a wobble extension and a swivel connector, this is a wobble extension. You can get them at Harbor Freight, any tool stores. The little head is kind of like rounded off, so it gives the socket a little bit of play on there. And then just a regular swivel onto the wobble gives it just that much more movement. So that's what I was able to use to go around the steering rack and actually get those top bolts off. So there's your little tool trick to get that in. And then also, just to make these faster once you break them loose, you could use these little angle head gear wrenches, and those will kind of go at an angle like that, and you can twist it right off because it's kind of a tight fit, but those tools will get the job done. So I left one bolt in right there just to make sure that once everything's off, you can see that it's hanging now, it's dropped down. So I'm gonna take that bolt off, and then we're gonna carefully lower it down. You do have your pickup screen and your dipstick that's gonna be sticking down right here. So you do wanna do it slowly, use 2 hands and try to guide it around that pickup tube, up and over the axle hopefully, and then it should come right out. So we're gonna give it a shot now. Okay, so the oil pan is out. It was pretty simple. Once it's angled down, you can see your pickup tube right here, so you can kind of peek in there and make sure that you get it out and around it. And now you can see this is the bottom half of your engine. So this is where your oil pan goes to. So now we're just gonna go ahead and start cleaning everything up. So you can see I gotta remove the old gasket right here. There is silicone at all 4 corners. It's little T-joints, and that's where you're gonna put the silicone at. So we're gonna use a rag and some brake cleaner and just clean up everything down here, scrape off any of the old silicone. That way we have a fresh mating surface for the new gasket and silicone to go onto. So once you have that all cleaned up under the truck, you're going to want to bring your oil pan out and clean it up also. Just put it over your oil drain pan and just clean it with some brake cleaner and a rag. Get it as clean as you can. Same thing for this whole surface. Then you're going to take your new gasket and line up the holes. There's these little tabs on the side that you can use just to kind of push it over on each side to make sure that your holes stay aligned a little bit better. And then we're going to go under the truck and put that silicone sealant on all the corners. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and start putting the oil pan back on. So right here and right here is where you're gonna put the gasket maker, and then right there and right there. So you'll see the little tiny slivers right there where the timing cover goes to it and this back plate goes to it. So we're gonna go ahead and put that there. And then after that, we're gonna go ahead and put our oil pan back on. Also, while you're under here, you obviously just wanna do a quick little inspection, make sure nothing catastrophic looks wrong. Also, you can check your oil pickup filter and just make sure there's nothing big blocking that, and pick anything out that's blocking that right there. So now it's pretty clean. And then you're gonna follow the torque sequence for these. So I'm actually gonna put a photo right here. So go ahead and screenshot it or pause it, and then you can go ahead and do that. And that's pretty much your final step to get the oil pan on. So once you're finished with that torque sequence, the oil pan is on there. So you're gonna wanna let it sit overnight. So that way the gasket maker has time to fully cure. And then the next day, you go ahead and put oil back in it like a regular oil change. Make sure you change your oil filter also. Reassemble everything out. So obviously tonight you can finish reassembling everything. It's just opposite of what you did when you took it apart. You're good to go. Hopefully that helps you guys. All right, so I'm gonna put my truck back together, let that gasket maker sit overnight. Tomorrow I'm gonna fill it with oil, finish everything off, make sure that everything looks good, and then take it for a test drive. If you guys have any questions, leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer it. I'm gonna put a link for all the stuff that I use in the description. And make sure you guys check out my channel for other videos, and peace.